Welcome to the Maniac Sky Japan YouTube channel. Today, let's dive into and decipher Cover Regulation to Implementing Regulation, EU 219947, Article 18, Tasks of the Competent Authority.
Yes, and it's a really fascinating topic today.
It really is. I mean, imagine you're just walking your dog on a quiet Sunday morning.
Right, totally normal day.
Yeah, and then a commercial delivery drone suddenly loses power and it just crashes onto your neighbor's roof.
Oh, wow.
Like, who do you actually call in that situation? Do you call the local police? Do you call the Federal Aviation Administration?
It's a great question because traditionally aviation has always had a very clear, highly centralized set of authorities,
Exactly. You know exactly who manages the airports and the big jetliners.
Right, but drones have completely decentralized the sky.
And that's exactly what we're getting into. If you are watching our video feed, you will see we have slide 1 up on the screen to start us off.
Yeah, and the mission of our deep dive today is to walk through this 14-page slide deck that effectively lays out the rules for the rulemakers.
Right, we're talking about the competent authorities.
Exactly. These are the national bodies across the European Union officially tasked with keeping our skies safe, organized, and free from rogue drones.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I know that sitting down to read European Union regulatory text is usually a highly effective cure for insomnia.
It can be a little dry, yeah.
But the implications of this document are actually wild when you start thinking about the logistics. It's not just theory, it's a massive real-world puzzle.
It really is. The EU essentially had to design an entirely new branch of government oversight from the ground up.
Because the airspace from 0 to 400 feet has never been managed like this before, right?
Precisely. Whether you're flying a small toy drone in your backyard or you're running a massive commercial drone delivery fleet, these are the authorities tracking you, licensing you, and potentially auditing you.
Which brings us to the most immediate question, like, who actually enforces all of this? Moving on to slide 2, we get our first look at the enforcers on the ground.
Right, this covers Article 18.a. Slide 2 establishes the baseline. Okay. The fundamental task of the competent authority is to enforce the UAS, or Unmanned Aircraft Systems, regulation.
But the European Union doesn't mandate exactly who that authority must be, do they?
No, they don't. Each member state gets to decide which national entity acts as their competent authority.
But hold on, reading through the source material for this slide, it says that local law enforcement might actually be the ones fulfilling these roles.
Yeah, depending on the member state's legal framework, absolutely.
How does that practically work? Like, if I'm flying a drone in a park, is a beat cop supposed to know the nuances of EU aviation law? Are they really acting as sky cops?
It sounds counterintuitive, I know, but it actually bridges a massive gap.
Oh, so?
Well, think about traditional aviation. You don't call the local police if a Boeing 747 is flying too low.
Right, of course not.
But for drones, it makes perfect sense. A local police officer is much better positioned to handle a neighborhood dispute.
Oh, I see. So if a drone is hovering outside your bedroom window, the issue isn't really about air traffic control.
Exactly. In that moment, it's about privacy, security, and noise. So local law enforcement often becomes the frontline aviation inspector.
That totally shifts how we think about airspace. It's like getting pulled over for a noise complaint, but, vertically.
Vertically, yeah, that's a great way to put it.
But of course, before you even get in the air to cause a noise complaint, you need the right paperwork. So let's talk about the drone DMV.
The drone DMV, I like that.
On slide 3, we start getting into the certification and licensing duties under Article 18.b and c.
Right. The regulation splits drones into categories based on risk, and that dictates the paperwork.
Okay, so what's the highest risk?
That's known as the certified category. For this, the authority acts much like a traditional aviation administration.
So they're formally issuing or suspending certificates.
Yes, the certificates of the UAS operators and the actual licenses of the remote pilots.
But most people listening are probably dealing with the open category. Right?
Yeah, the vast majority are in the open category.
Before we go further, for the listener who might just be getting into this, what do the A1, A2, and A3 subcategories actually mean in plain English?
Good question. The open category is generally lower risk, but it's tiered. A1 means you're flying a very light drone.
And that's okay to fly over people.
Momentarily, yes, it's generally accepted, but A3 is at the other end, heavier drones.
So you have to fly those far away from people and buildings.
Exactly. And in both of those cases, the authority just issues a proof of completion for a basic online exam.
Okay, so where does A2 fit in?
A2 sits right in the middle. It involves slightly heavier drones flown closer to people than A3 allows.
So the risk is a bit higher.
Right, so the authority's job levels up. They have to issue, amend, suspend, or revoke a formal certificate of remote pilot competency.
Got it. So the open category handles the everyday hobbyist. But what happens when a company wants to fly a drone to deliver medical supplies?
Transitioning to slide 4, that brings us to the specific category.
Under Article 18.dng, right?
Yes. This is where operations start getting really complex. The authority has to manage a rigorous authorization process here.
So they're issuing operational authorizations. And they also handle something called Light UAS Operator Certificates.
Yes, or LUCs for short.
Wait, I've seen that acronym pop up a lot. What is an LUC in practice? Is it like a VIP pass for drone companies?
That's actually a really good way to think about it. It's a certificate granted to highly experienced organizations.
Okay, so what does it let them do?
Once they prove they have robust safety management systems, the LUC essentially allows them to self-authorize their own flights.
No way. So they don't have to ask the authority for permission every single time.
Exactly. It's a huge privilege, which means the authority has to vet them incredibly thoroughly first.
Talk about drone driver's license bureaucracy. And what really made me laugh about this, maybe laugh is the wrong word for EU paperwork, was the cross-border rule.
Oh, the formal receipts.
Yeah. If a commercial operator wants to take their drone from France into Germany, the authority doesn't just quietly process it.
No, they are legally mandated to issue a formal confirmation of receipt and completeness.
It's like demanding a bureaucratic read receipt for your drone flight.
It sounds tedious, but there's a strict legal mechanism behind it. You're dealing with two different sovereign airspaces.
Right.
That read receipt proves to the host country, Germany in this case, that your home country's authority in France has officially vetted you.
So it establishes a chain of legal liability before the drone ever crosses the border.
Exactly. It's a paper shield.
So from paper shields to the digital realm, that brings up a whole new set of headaches. Now, looking at slide 5, we get into invisible fences.
Yes, the digital information and registration requirements under Article 18.f&m.
So how does this work?
This is where the physical world meets the digital infrastructure. The authority has to make information on UAS geographical zones available.
Basically, no-fly zones or restricted areas.
Right, but they have to be in a common, unique digital format.
So if the authority draws an invisible fence around a hospital, does my drone just bounce off it in midair?
It actually acts very much like a force field.
Really?
Yeah, because of this common format, manufacturers download that exact map directly into the drone's firmware.
Wow, so when the GPS hits those coordinates,
The software literally restricts the motors from moving any further in that direction. It just hovers there.
geofencing. That is so cool.
But beyond maps, the authority also has to establish highly accurate registration systems for the operators themselves.
And what's wild is how they define who needs to be registered. It's not just the big certified drones.
No, what's fascinating here is the specific language the regulation uses.
Right. It explicitly states these systems must cover operators posing risks to safety, privacy, data protection, or the environment.
Exactly. The EU is formally acknowledging that a drone isn't just a flying hazard that might hit a helicopter
It's a flying camera that could violate GDPR.
or a flying noisemaker that could disrupt an endangered bird sanctuary.
It's a massive expansion of what an aviation authority has historically cared about.
Huge expansion.
Well, we've covered who these authorities are and what licenses they issue. Before we dive into the massive paperwork trails and complex auditing requirements, we want to take a quick second to hear from you.
Please let me know your thoughts in the comments, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Even though I'm an AI, your support really boosts my motivation to improve my pronunciation and create better content for you.
We truly appreciate you joining us on these deep dives. All right, let's get into the bureaucratic backbone of this whole operation.
The record keeping.
Yeah, the record keeping. We are going to walk through slide 6, slide 7, slide 8, and slide 9 sequentially.
Because they all paint a picture of mandated digital hoarding.
Exactly. Slide 6 sets the ground rules.
And the rules are incredibly strict. Under Article 18E, the authority must keep documents, records, and reports concerning everything.
Operational authorizations, declarations, pilot certificates.
And those LUC VIP passes we mentioned. But the kicker is the retention period.
Right. All of these records must be kept for at least 3 years after their validity date expires.
Yes. 3 years after they die.
That's the part that blew my mind. If I have an operational authorization that lasts for 5 years, they hold that data for 8 years total.
Yep, 8 years.
Think about the scale of this. How is a small national aviation authority paying for those server costs? We're talking gigabytes of files across thousands of operators.
It is a monumental IT infrastructure challenge for sure.
Are they using massive cloud infrastructure? The how of this seems like an absolute IT nightmare.
The regulation demands that the system ensures traceability and retrievability throughout that entire retention period, complete with backups.
So they can't just dump this onto a dusty hard drive in a basement.
No, they have to build enterprise-level, secure databases to manage it all.
And moving to slide 7, we see exactly what they're hoarding. For operational authorizations, they have to retain the initial application, updated applications, and the risk assessment.
Plus all supporting materials. They also have to keep the operator's privacy statements and proof of insurance compliance.
And track every successive change over time. It creates an unbroken chain of custody.
For the operation's entire lifespan, yes.
And it doesn't stop there. On slide 8, we look at the records for competencies and LUCs.
Right. The authority has to retain remote pilot proofs of past theoretical exams and practical self-training declarations.
And for the LUCs, it's the initial applications, amendments, and the terms of approval.
Exactly. And finally, on slide 9, we see they even have to keep records on themselves.
Wait, really?
Yeah, the authority must retain documentation related to their own audits and inspections of UAS operators.
Oh, wow. So the training and qualifications of their own audit team leaders.
Yes, and the specific audit programs they ran, detailed reports, objectives, dates, everything.
Plus, the records have to clearly show any findings, the corrective actions, and the former closure of nonconformities.
It's extremely thorough.
So bringing this back to reality, what does this all mean for a drone operator? Why go to all this trouble?
It means absolute, undeniable traceability. What happens when things go wrong?
Let's say a commercial delivery drone falls out of the sky and causes property damage.
Right, and let's say this happens 2 years after the company actually stopped operating.
Because of the strict retention rule, the authority can pull the thread.
Exactly. They can track the paperwork back to the specific risk assessment the operator filed, the insurance statement, even the initial pilot exam.
So liability and accountability never just disappear into the ether. It's like an impenetrable web.
Truly impenetrable.
But with all these operators and all this data, how do they actually police it all in real time? They can't possibly audit every single drone pilot.
No, they can't. And that brings us to the smart audit.
Moving to slide 10, we see the development of the RBO, or Risk-Based Oversight System.
Right. RBO is the core engine of how the EU manages its limited regulatory resources.
Who does it apply to?
It applies to operators holding an operational authorization, an LUC, or those who submitted a declaration in the specific category.
And even model aircraft clubs, right?
Yes, operating under an Article 16 authorization, which is a carve-out for traditional hobbyist RC clubs.
On slide 11, the principles of this RBO are laid out. And this is where the genius of the system really shines.
The goal is to ensure entities meet the requirements efficiently without wasting manpower.
So they evaluate 2 main factors, right?
Yes, the risk profile and the safety performance of the operator.
So let me make sure I'm deducing this correctly. The risk profile is based on the inherent risk of the activity.
Correct. The activity itself dictates the baseline.
Like flying a massive agricultural drone spraying chemicals over a farm versus flying a tiny camera drone over an empty beach.
Exactly.
Okay, so if my risk profile is high because I'm flying a heavy rig over a crowded concert, but my safety performance is flawless.
Meaning your company has never had a single violation or crash.
Right. Does the authority's algorithm basically score me to decide if I get audited?
You've hit the nail on the head. Safety performance is entirely about your proven track record.
Slide 12 covers how they actually use this data for audit planning. It reminds me of a tax audit.
A tax audit? How so?
Well, the tax authority doesn't have the manpower to audit every single taxpayer equally, right? They use data to target the ones cooking up the biggest risks.
That is exactly how risk-based oversight functions.
So if you have a complex risk profile but a flawless safety record, you see fewer inspections.
Yes. But if your safety performance starts slipping, maybe a few minor incidents are reported, the system flags you.
And the regulation states they can carry out remote inspections too, right?
Yes. They don't always have to show up at your launch site. They can remotely audit your digital flight logs.
It's a highly targeted, data-driven approach. But it's not all just about catching people breaking the rules.
No, definitely not.
As we approach the end on slide 13, we look at the balance of carrots and sticks.
Right, under Article 18.KNL. The stick is that the authority must implement a system to detect and examine incidents of noncompliance.
So they are actively analyzing occurrences reported under Article 19.
Yes, they are constantly looking for patterns of failure, but there is a carrot, too.
Which I think is vital.
Crucially, the regulation requires the authority to take a proactive role in safety promotion.
Meaning they have to provide operators with relevant education and guidance?
Exactly. They are legally mandated to promote flight safety.
That is such an important distinction. They aren't just a punisher hiding in the bushes waiting to issue a massive fine.
No, they are educators. They're tasked with building a culture of safety from the ground up.
Providing the resources operators actually need to understand these complex rules.
Because a regulatory body is always more effective when the community willingly complies.
Right, because they understand the why behind the rules, rather than just fearing the punishment.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Finally, slide 14 brings us to our summary of this incredibly dense but fascinating topic.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We really have.
Oh.
We basically traced the complete life cycle of regulatory administration for drones in the EU,
From issuing simple online pilot certificates under the open category.
to the magic of geofencing, all the way up to executing complex, risk-based oversight audits on commercial operators.
It is a monumental task that these competent authorities have been handed.
It really is.
And it leaves me with a lingering thought, especially building on the Q&A prompt from slide 14.
That's
When you consider the strict mandate to retain massive digital files for 3 years after they expire.
Oh, the digital hoarding.
Right. Combined with the intense data requirements for the RBO system, how will these national authorities handle the sheer, overwhelming volume of data?
Especially as drones inevitably become as common in our skies as delivery trucks are on our roads.
Exactly. The ongoing IT infrastructure required to sustain this oversight is staggering to think about.
That is a massive question, and one I think we will see the answers to play out in real time over the next decade.
I agree.
Please share your thoughts and feedback in the comments section down below.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel.
You can find links to other videos in this series in the description box, so be sure to check them out.
I'll see you in the next video from Maniac Sky Japan. Goodbye and take care.